kingdom divide. In verses 1 through 20 of 1 Kings chapter 12, the kingdom has divided. I've showed you here on the map, and I put the red line so that you can see it a little bit easier. The division you have in the south, you have the kingdom of Judah, which is ruled by the son of Solomon, whose name is Rehoboam. In the north, you have the kingdom of Israel, which is made up of 10 of the tribes of Israel, ruled over by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And we're going to get to know Jeroboam especially a little bit better tonight, though we'll talk about both of them. The kingdom divided because Rehoboam, who received a united kingdom from his father, Solomon, he opted to hearken to the counsel of his peers rather than to the wiser and older generation. When he was asked by Israel, the united Israel, he was asked if he would lighten the tax burden, because Solomon lived a lavish and a luxurious life, and that was supported in large part through the taxation of the people. And so the people came to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, David's grandson. They said, hey, we'd really love if you'd lighten up a little bit. We're doing all that we can. It amounted to slavery. And so Rehoboam said, come back in 3 days, and I'll give you an answer. In that time, he listened to the old men who said, yeah, lighten their burden, and they'll serve you. And he listened to the young men, his peers, who said, you tell them you ain't seen nothing yet. If you thought my dad was bad, I'm really going to lay it on. And 3 days later, when everyone came, the spokesman for the united Israel, the tribes of Israel, especially in the north, was Jeroboam. And they said, so what say you? And he said, I'm going to make it that much worse. The 10 tribes said, we're done. Forget it. We're not going to serve you. We don't have anything to do with the house of David. And so they seceded from the united nation of Israel. The 10 tribes left, and they went north. Now, I'm going to try as we go throughout this, and I know there's some confusion when we talk about Israelites, because sometimes you have to ask, well, when do you mean? You mean before the division or after the division? I'm going to try as we go forward. The people in the north, they are called Israelites. The people in the south would be called Judeans. And so I'll try, and I know I will mess up on this from time to time. You may have to tell from context if I'm talking about the whole of Israel or the northern kingdom, but I'll try my best when I'm using the word Israelites. I'm going to try to just be speaking of the northern kingdom. When we talk about Hebrews, we're talking about all of them. When we use the term Jews, we're talking about all of them. Okay, so we're going to keep that as something to keep in the back of your mind as we go forward. Last week we also saw, after the division, Rehoboam tried to force the issue. He sent his tax collector, named Adoram, sent his tax collector and said, you just go and collect their taxes anyway. It doesn't matter if they think they succeeded. We're just going to collect their taxes anyway. Well, all he got back of Adoram was his bloody carcass, because the people of Israel stoned him to death and said, we're not paying your taxes. We're not under your domain anymore. Rehoboam, when he received back the bloody carcass of his tax collector, it didn't take him long to realize, boy, I really made a mistake here. That was not very bright. And so he leaves Shechem, where they were having this kind of a powwow, leaves Shechem and speeds back home to Jerusalem, which is the capital of the southern kingdom of Judah. And that's where we pick up tonight, and we start off with a tragedy that is going to be averted. We're going to deal with some tragedy tonight that is not, but we start off with God intervening. He's still kind of smarting from his rejection, the loss of well over half of his domain. Rehoboam immediately sets out to reunite the kingdom. He's going to not allow the northern tribes to secede. I'm going to bring them back by force of arms. Verse 21. And when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah with the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen men, which were warriors, to fight against the house of Israel, and to bring the kingdom again to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. What we're seeing right here, what we're seeing almost play out, would be a perfect description of Proverbs 16:18. you know the verse, pride goeth before destruction, and haughty spirit before a fall. Rehoboam has lost in 3 days what his father and his grandfather ruled over for 80 years. That's a downturn, to put it mildly. And so his pride has been wounded, and he's about to add another foolish choice to his list of foolish choices that have placed him in this position. I mentioned this also to you last week. We have here, let me show you on the map, the 12 tribes. So you have the 12 tribal territories, and we've gone over this before, so I'm not going to belabor it. But you see the tiny tribal territory of Benjamin. It's just on the north side of Judah, and so it's right on the border. And sometimes Judah is split. This, right here that we're looking at in chapter 12, is one of the instances when much of Benjamin sided with Judah. Now, they're right on the border. Jerusalem, which is in the north of the kingdom of Judah, and in the tribe of Judah, it's real close to the border of Benjamin. So this time, Benjamin sides with Rehoboam and the tribe of Judah. Their loyalties are somewhat questionable. Yes, sir?
You're talking about different sections of Israel there. And even today, there was the Gaza Strip. How did that all, I mean, you've probably told us this before, but I mean, even on that map there, it shows the strip. And so, how did they not, Israel not keep that? I mean, that's been a hot spot for years. It is today, and it's still a mess right in there, and that strip is always a mess. How did that become, and how it's coming still there? Or why it's coming to you was even there then?
Well, the Gaza Strip, Gaza was a Philistine city, and the Philistines, Goliath would be among them, and that ilk. They're in the Gaza Strip right there, and so it was under Israelite control, but it was always a problem area for them. Then, after Solomon, you're going to see it continues to be a problem. And then when Israel came back and they retook Israel in 1948 after they declared independence, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and the Golan Heights and all of these areas that you hear talked about in the news, they were part of the land for peace deals that Israel, they gave away land in an effort to achieve peace, and it never works. And so that's the reason why is the Gaza Strip inhabited by the enemies of a sovereign nation when they used to have it? Because they gave it away. Yeah, so it is a mess. It's land for peace that never works, unfortunately. Back here in 1 Kings 12, in this conflict, as I mentioned, Benjamin, who were historically a fierce and a warlike people, they allied themselves with Rehoboam and Judah as they prepared to march to war. 180,000 troops from Judah are prepared to draw swords on their kinsmen. Again, this would be a fight between the children of Jacob. This is not a fight with the Philistines or the Hittites or the Jebusites. This is a fight between the Judeans and the Israelites. They're going to go to war. They're going to begin killing one another. Verse 22. But the word of the Lord came unto Shemaiah, the man of God, saying, Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and unto all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Ye shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. This is God speaking. This is not Shemaiah just saying, well, this is by my authority. This is Shemaiah speaking for Jehovah. He said, this thing is from me. Real quick, what thing? The division. The division of the kingdom is of God. Why? Well, because Solomon sinned. And God told Solomon, you're going to lose the kingdom. I'm not going to take it from you. I'm going to take it from your son. God has done that, and now as Rehoboam's getting ready to draw swords on his kinsmen, God says, no, don't do this. Everybody go home. The end of verse 24. They hearkened therefore. It's about time he makes a wise choice. This is the first one he's made since he came into the kingdom. They hearkened therefore to the word of the Lord and returned to depart according to the word of the Lord. He doesn't have a great track record of wise choices, but Rehoboam does heed the words of the man of God, Shemaiah. He says, okay, fine. This is of God. This incident right here showcases the sovereignty of God. God is behind the secession of the northern tribes. It had been foretold years before. God would not allow the tribes to be reunited. God would not allow he wouldn't allow this campaign to be successful. Any fighting that would take place would mean the pointless death of thousands, and so God prevented it. Why? Because they're both sides are his chosen people. No, I'm not going to let you butcher one another over something that I have ordained to happen. Rehoboam wouldn't have just been fighting against Israel alone. He'd have been waging war on God himself. And to his credit, again, the first wise choice the man has made since he came into the throne, he backs off. There won't be peace between Israel and Judah for many years. There will be a time, right now, you could divide the story of the two kingdoms in 1st and 2nd Kings. You could divide it into 4 parts. The first part, there's conflict between the two. Then there's going to be kind of a tenuous peace. And they're going to work together sometimes, and sometimes they're going to actually, they'll ally themselves against other groups, and then there's going to be another turn where Judah begins to fight against Israel. But right now, there's not going to be peace. There's not going to be peace, and the two would never, until one day that is yet in the future, they will never be under one king, under one Jewish king again. So that deals with Rehoboam. Rehoboam in the south, in Judah, he's done his part. He's listened to God, he's backed off, and civil war won't happen. Let's talk about Jeroboam. Jeroboam certainly knew that Rehoboam was going to come against him. He knows it's a distinct possibility that my family, the Jews in the south, the Judeans, it's a very real possibility that they may march against us. They may come against us, and so Jeroboam takes defensive measures. Look with me at verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim, and dwelt therein, and went out from thence, and built Penuel. I'll show you on the map where we're talking about here again. Here we have Shechem. You see again the dividing line between the northern and the southern kingdoms. Shechem is on the west bank. It's on the west side, and it's on a major trade route. If you want to go north in Israel, as you go north, unless you go to the coast, you're going to pass Shechem. And so it's a very strategic point to have their defenses built up. We're going to build up Shechem. This is also the place that Jeroboam establishes as his capital. I'm going to rule from Shechem, which I'm going to build up the defenses so that if Judah or any other person, if anybody tries to come against us, this is where we're going to marshal our defenses. We have a defensive fallback in Shechem. But he also built up the defenses of Penuel. And you see, Penuel is on the eastern bank. The Jordan River runs between them. So Penuel would be in what would be today called modern-day Jordan. Okay? You have Shechem in the center of the land of Israel. You have Penuel's on the other side, and it again is a very defensive position. It's on the river Jabbok, which is one of the tributaries that runs into the Jordan, which then runs into the Dead Sea. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few moments in another context. He asserted his right to rule over the territory when he built up Penuel on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. He's asserting what was his right to rule over, there were 3 tribes on that side of the river. You remember that? 3 tribes, when they came into the land, 3 tribes came to Joshua and they said, we'd actually like to stay here. But actually they came to Moses, and Moses said, okay, you can stay here. It was Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, because they had cattle and the land on that side of the river was good for cattle. And so by building up on both sides of the Jordan, we have Jeroboam kind of solidifying his strategic position there in the north. These two cities would give military presence, and it would prevent any incursion by Rehoboam and the forces of Judah. This is not moral or immoral. This is just military defenses that are being built up by the king. Next, we come to religious compromise. Jeroboam compromised in verse 26. And Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah. And they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah." There's only one temple. Where's the temple? Jerusalem. Who built the temple? Solomon. Solomon, the last king of the United Empire. He's the one who built the temple. It's in the capital city. So I can appreciate Jeroboam's problem here. He has just built up his defenses. He's defending against a military incursion by Rehoboam up from the south, and he knows that 3 times a year, all of the men in his kingdom are supposed to make a journey down to a foreign capital and worship the Lord. We talked about this passage this morning in relation to Jesus going up to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. Deuteronomy 16:16 says, 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose. Again, that's Jerusalem. In this day, it's the Temple of Solomon. 3 times in a year, all the men, Israelite and Judean, they're supposed to get together in Israel. Now, how is that going to work? Because there's some animosity there. There's tension between their two kings. There are tensions between the individuals, no doubt. The feasts are listed out, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. They're supposed to bring sacrifice. So the political division of the nation of Israel that was ordained of God, there was a spiritual division that we're about to witness that is not of God. God did not intend for the people in the north to go into idolatry while the people in the south continued to worship in the temple of Jehovah. What should have happened here? Again, we're going to just imagine history, okay, because this isn't what happened, but what should have happened? Well, what should have happened is that the people of the northern kingdom, the Israelites, they should have continued their worship of Jehovah in accordance with the law of Moses. The Levites should have still lived in their cities in the north. They should have made their pilgrimage down to serve in the temple, and 3 times a year, all of the men of Israel should have made their trip down and worshiped the Lord and offered sacrifices. But Jeroboam is not thinking spiritually. He's thinking carnally. He's not looking at this through the eyes of worship. He's not looking at this through the eyes of one who worships the Messiah. Rather, he's looking at this through the eyes of a king who feels like his position is a little bit shaky. My throne's not on solid ground right now. We're about to get a real-life example of the truth of Romans 8:6 that says, "For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." Question for you, and again, this is just us talking here. Would it have been strange for the men of Israel to journey down into Jerusalem and worship the Lord? Would it, on a political scale, would it have been strange? It would have been. But it would have been right. It's what God ordained, but they're not going to do that. Jeroboam has another idea. I think I know a way that I can fix this. He considers it to be too great of a risk to allow his subjects, the Israelites, to make their journey down to Jerusalem. This is probably even an unwarranted fear. I do want to point that out. The Israelites had just rejected Rehoboam. and the house of David because of the unreasonable taxes and burdens placed upon them. I would think that they would have enjoyed going down to Jerusalem because they're not paying for it anymore. They go down to Jerusalem, they say, look, you see how he's living up there in the palace? Those aren't my tax dollars at work. My tax dollars go into the north. I'm not under Rehoboam, I'm under Jeroboam. If anything, going to Jerusalem and seeing the way that Rehoboam lived should have made the Israelites happy to not be under his administration. But sinful choices are never justified. And in hindsight, they often appear to be entirely illogical. I don't think, and again, this is just my speculation, I don't think Jeroboam had anything to fear here, because the people of Israel have already made their choice. They deliberately walked away from the house of David. And I don't think there's any amount of going down there to worship in the temple that's going to change their minds. But Jeroboam isn't willing to take that chance. Look at verse 28. Here's his idea. Whereupon the king, Jeroboam, took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Here's what he's going to do. In order to prevent their switching sides when they go to worship God, the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God of Moses, the God of David, the God of Solomon, rather than them going down there to worship in Jerusalem, he's going to provide alternate gods and a more convenient worship for the people of Israel. Now, the words that I just read there, Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. They should sound familiar. Do you know where you should have heard those before? They were said at the bottom of Mount Sinai. When Moses was up on the mount, Aaron took and fashioned a golden calf. Let me read it to you. Exodus 32, verse 1. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount. Real quick. What is Moses doing up in the mount? He's getting 10 commandments. He's talking to God. Do you remember the first of the 10 commandments? What is the first of the 10 commandments? No other gods before me. You remember the second of the 10 commandments? The second is no graven images. You remember the third? The third is don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And what are they doing down at the bottom of the mountain? While Moses is up at the top, and you can't even see the top. Because there's smoke, there's fire, there's lightning, there's thunder. The people are scared. They're not allowed to touch the mountain. What are they doing in the valley? They're breaking all of the rules. They're breaking the 10 commandments. The people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mountain. The people gathered themselves unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods. The idiocy of that statement should blow your mind. What do you mean, up and make us gods? Gods aren't something that you can make. But that's what they say. Make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, real quick, is that accurate? Did Moses bring them up out of the land of Egypt? No, God brought them up out of the land of Egypt. If you'll recall, Moses didn't want the job. He says, We want not what is become of him. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives and of your sons and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. The people brake off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron, and he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, listen to these words, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Once again, to cite a quote that you're familiar with, George Santayana said, Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's what's happening. They've already been down this road with a golden calf, with someone standing up and making that statement. But they fall for it again. Because somewhere along the line, one generation of the Israelites, and when I say that, I'm referring to all of them, one generation of the Hebrews had dropped the ball in telling the next generation about the dealings of God with them in their past. And so the next generation fell for the same temptation. because it doesn't take long. It doesn't take many generations to lose spiritual maturity. It takes almost no time at all. By the way, the idea of worshiping a calf, we look at that and say, of all the animals, why, you're worshiping a cow. Why? Perhaps you've heard the expression, holy cow. It's not something that is entirely unknown. It was not unique to the Israelites. The reason they did it at the foot of Sinai, no doubt, is because they'd seen the Egyptians do it. The Egyptians had certain gods that had the form of a cow, in some cases the body of a man and the head of a cow. Archaeology, however, has uncovered calves used in idolatry all over this region of the world. When we talk about the Canaanites who were in the land already, they worshipped cows and calves. Warren Wiersbe had this to say. He said it took one night to take Israel out of Egypt, the night after the Passover. But it took 40 years to take Egypt out of Israel. Why? Because they had allowed it to seep into them, and truth be told, it took longer than 40 years. God had commanded what they were supposed to do with idols. He took no cut corners here. He left nothing for us to imagine. He says in Exodus 34:13, which, by the way, is part of the scripture that Jeroboam would have had. He would have had copies of this portion of God's word. Exodus 34:13. But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, cut down their groves, for thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, he is a jealous God. I'll preach on this verse one day, and we'll go into his name is jealous. We know him as Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Another of his names is jealous, with a capital J. Interesting. Another passage that Jeroboam would have had, Deuteronomy 7, verse 5, but thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. They weren't even to take the images for their metal value. They weren't supposed to say, well, this, I understand what you're saying, that idols aren't good, but this idol is made out of solid gold. So I'm going to take it home, and I'm not going to worship it. I'm just going to keep it for gold value. No, you destroy it. Why? Because I don't want you to fall for it. I don't want you to fall into this trap. But in one calculated act of self-interest, Jeroboam set Israel down a very dark path. A path of idolatry and divine judgment. It says in verse 29, and he set the one in Bethel, and the other one put he in Dan. And this thing became a sin for the people, went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. Let me show you on the map here again. Here is Dan in the far north, way up at the top. When you hear the term from Dan to Beersheba, Dan is the extreme north, Beersheba would be the extreme south. We're talking about Dan way up in the north. I'll show you a picture in just a moment. My wife and I were able to go to this place when we were there. When you're standing in Dan, you can look, and the hills right there are Lebanon. That's how close you are to the top of Israel, even in this day. It's way up in the north. You're up in the top. So he puts one in Dan, in the extreme north, and one in Bethel. Why two? Well, his goal to begin this was what? At least one of his goals was, it's more convenient. If you got two of them, you can go. If you live in the middle, pick the one that's closest to you. Doesn't matter. Go to whichever calf suits you. By the way, Bethel. One of them's in Bethel, one of them's in Dan. What does Bethel mean? You remember? Beit El would be how you would break it in Hebrew. Beit meaning house, El meaning God. Bethel is the house of God. So named by Jacob when he had the vision, you remember, of the ladder that ascended up to heaven with the angels ascending and descending? It was named by Jacob, and here we have Jeroboam putting idols there to be worshipped. Let me show you a picture. This is when Steph and I were over in Israel. We actually visited this place, and they had just recently, fairly recently, uncovered the place of the altar. So right here, you'll see the foundation stones, the metal part, obviously, that's built so that you can get the idea of the size of it. But That's what the Israelite altars, you see the 4 horns on the corners of the altar? That's one way that you can tell it's an Israelite altar, because all Israelite altars have 4 horns. Horns on each of the corners. But it's a very, very large altar, and they found this. This is the worship site that Jeroboam built there in the extreme north. Again, if you're standing here, if you were to look behind where I was standing taking this picture, you'd be able to see Lebanese airspace very, very easily. It's just right over the top of the mountain there. This is the area up at it's north of the Sea of Galilee. It's by the headwaters of the Jordan. So the Jordan, the tributaries, they start running together. There are 7 of them. They start running together and they form, and then they run into the Sea of Galilee. And then the Sea of Galilee goes into when we think of the Jordan, that stream that runs between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea in the south. There is no outlet of the Dead Sea. Why is he doing this? Why is why is he building all of this? Again, because he's trying to ensure the loyalty of Israel, his kingdom, and it's more convenient too. Win-win, right? No, lose-lose. Because convenience in worship always comes at a very high price. If you've read the Old Testament, if you've read the Law of Moses, is the word that you would use to describe the worship of Jehovah God, would you describe it as convenient? Not really. It takes a lot of sacrifices, all of these festivals, all of these feasts, all of this is going on. God didn't intend for it to be convenient. God intended for it to be something that would foster thought. But Jeroboam sidestepping all of that. Hey, we'll make it convenient and we'll preserve our kingdom. But one compromise begets, you guessed it, another compromise. Verse 31. And he made an house of high places. So he's got an altar in the north in Dan and an altar in the south of his kingdom in Bethel. But he also made an house of high places and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. Now I'd like to, I don't have any reason to give them credit here, but I'd like to give the sons of Levi credit and say that maybe he asked them and they said, forget it. No, we're not going to lead in the worship of these false gods. But again, we don't have that recorded for us. These high places, let's talk about them. The high places were the locations where the Canaanites had worshipped their false gods. The high places are often mentioned in connection with a grove of trees that they would plant nearby. So when you talk about the high places, it often says the altar and the grove. That's the plot of trees around it. And once again, in Deuteronomy, God says what they were supposed to have done with these places. He says, ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree, and ye shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place. God didn't want even the remnants. When you go to one of these worship sites, all you should find are stumps, because everything else has been turned to powder. But that's not what they did. God had spelled out how he was to be worshipped. In Deuteronomy 12:5, he says, but unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose, out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek. And thither thou shalt come. And thither ye shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifice. What's the name of that place where God has chosen to put his name? Jerusalem. A specific place in Jerusalem is the temple. The temple that Solomon had built. So here we have yet another account of God's people trying to worship God according to their own ways. I think it'd be better if we did it this way. It'd certainly be more convenient, because if we do it this way, we don't have to travel down to Jerusalem. We don't have to take that much time off work. We can do what we want. We can worship God when we please and how we please. Children of Israel got comfortable worshiping God on the high places, so much so that even after Solomon's temple was completed, they had continued to do so. 1 Kings 2 verse 2 says, And Solomon loved the Lord and walked in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed burnt incense in high places. And then at the end of his life, Solomon had participated in building temples to false gods. So it was a natural step for Jeroboam in trying to prevent people from going down to Jerusalem to officially recognize and use the high places. So it's not just the temple, not just the altar in Dan, not just the altar in Bethel. There's also high places. You can worship gods wherever you want to, but you don't have to go to Jerusalem to do so. He also says here in verse 31 that he made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. Hosea prophesied this. He says in Hosea 4 verse 9, and there shall be like people, like priests. Israel turned their back on Jehovah. They started to serve themselves. Is it any wonder that they found priests who were just like them? It's to be expected. Look with me at verse 32 here. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. He's making a copycat feast, a counterfeit of the feast we'll see here in a few moments. It's a counterfeit of the Feast of Tabernacles. It says, like unto the feast that is in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made. Are you hearing a repetition here? It's talking about the God that he had made. Verse 33, so he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel, and he offered upon the altar and burnt incense. So not only did he make idols, not only did he recognize the high places, not only did he bring in the low class to be the priests, the leaders, the spiritual leaders, he's directly establishing a rivalry with the worship of Jehovah. Hey, you don't need to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. If you wait a month, you can celebrate my feast here, and it's more convenient. What do we take away from this? There's a lot. Next week, we're going to start in chapter 13. In chapter 13, as Jeroboam, he's standing at the altar in Bethel, and he's preparing to offer a sacrifice when he's confronted by the prophet of God. And 1 Kings 13 is a passage that always leaves me feeling odd. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I encourage you. Read it before we get to it. You'll see, you'll feel odd too. Every time I read it, I'm left feeling just off at what happens. But we're not going to deal with that tonight. What happened here? What happened when we ended last week? We had two kingdoms, both worshiping Jehovah. Now we have one kingdom worshiping Jehovah, and we have the other kingdom worshiping gods which they had made. Well, this is what happens when compromise and convenience become more important than holiness and sanctification. This is what happens when the lessons from the past are forgotten, and the people race headlong into the sin that had brought God's judgment upon countless people. Walk with me here real quick, just briefly through the history. Why did God judge the Canaanites who were in the land? What were they doing that brought down God's judgment on them? They were worshiping idols. Why did God judge Israel in the book of Judges? Why did they keep coming under oppression of other nations? What was the sin that they kept falling into? They were worshiping idols. Why had Solomon lost the kingdom? Why was it torn away from Solomon, actually his son, but why was the kingdom torn away from him and divided in the first place? Because Solomon was worshiping idols. Israel, right here, the kingdom of Israel has lit a fuse that's going to take 209 years to burn with a whole series of bad kings, and it will terminate when they cease to be a kingdom altogether as they're taken captive by the Assyrians. Here's what we take from this tonight. I'm going to close with 2 verses. Isaiah 42 verse 8 says, I am the Lord. That is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. God is serious about His glory. God is serious about our worship. We might not be serious about our worship all the time. Sometimes we might kind of take it flippantly. Well, it's not convenient. It doesn't work out. I can't. God takes it seriously how we worship. Not just that we worship, but how we worship. The next verse, the last one that I'll give you here this evening, Exodus 34:14. For thou shalt worship no other God. I gave this to you earlier. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Jealous in the sense of a husband who is jealous of his wife, or a wife who's jealous of her husband, or of a parent who's jealous of their child. There is a godly jealousy, obviously, because God identifies Himself as jealous. Now, we're not Israel. The church hasn't replaced Israel, but we, if you're here this evening and you've trusted the Lord Jesus Christ, we are a peculiar people unto God. And you and I would do well to make sure that there aren't idols that are creeping up in our heart. And again, they're not going to be Baal and Ashtaroth and Molech, and they're not going to be those type of gods. They'll be habits, there'll be individuals, there'll be relationships, could be hobbies, could be physical possessions, could be any number of things that comes and replaces God. It comes between you and God. We need to make sure that there are no idols that creep into our heart, and we need to be very careful of how we worship Him, because God cares about our worship. We don't get to collectively decide, well, I think that we're going to worship God this way. God gets to decide how we worship Him. He gave us a book of how He is to be worshipped. We're to approach Him on these terms, or we risk seeing it won't be the same as He judged them in the same way, perhaps, but we risk the judgment of God when we try to worship Him on our own terms, or when we say, it's more convenient for me to do it this way. Worship isn't meant to be convenient. It's meant to bring our heart in line with God. It's meant to prove that He is the first and the only concern that we